Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Liberating the Queen, a podcast where we discuss amazing women in history that weren't in my history books. My goal for 2018 is to share what I have learned with all of you the 15th of every month. I am Susie Moscow, and today is August 15th, 2018. This episode is brought to you by Flip 'em the Bird. When you don't have the words, let our gloves say it for you. They could be purchased at www.flipemthebird.com. That's FLIPEMTHEBIRD.com. Today, we've welcomed back Miss Layla Moscow to this important discussion. Layla, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Layla Moscow, and I was in the last podcast.
Decades before Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, there was Shirley Chisholm. As the first Black woman to run for president for a major political party, she was years ahead of her time. So for me, I didn't know much about her, and I was surprised that I didn't hear as much about her as I thought I would have with the last presidential election. Shirley Chisholm made history as she announced her candidacy for the White House. Her bid for that job was short-lived, but the symbolism is as powerful today as it was then. She was a pioneer for her generation, a woman of many firsts, the first African-American congresswoman, the first African-American to run for president, the first woman to run for the Democratic Party presidential nomination. To those who know about her, Shirley Chisholm is more than a role model. She's an icon and a trailblazer, one who deserves greater credit and attention than history has afforded her. Despite her many achievements, Shirley is not a household name in the U.S. For this podcast, we will look at her life, her career, and her legacy. With the midterm elections coming up in the fall, we need more Shirleys in our government.
Shirley Anita was born on November 20th, 1924 in Brooklyn, New York.
Shirley was the oldest of four daughters. Her father, Charles, was a factory laborer from Ghana, and her mother, Ruby, a seamstress from Barbados. Charles and Ruby had met each other once in Barbados when they were much younger. Charles had decided to move to the U.S. and picked Brooklyn, New York because it had a rich Barbados culture there. Ruby's grandfather had decided that he wanted her to go to America as well. Barbados was in a very impoverished state at the time. They both ended up in Brooklyn and had reconnected at a local community event that was celebrating Barbados. And the rest is history. When they met, it was almost they immediately fell in love and were married. And within 3 years, they had 3 kids under the age of 3. Her mom barely had any time to work, as anybody would understand when you have 3 kids under the age of 3. She needed to be able to still provide income and provide for her family. It was at that time she had reached out to her mother and decided to send her 3 daughters to Barbados. She had a very strict rules if they were to go to Barbados, one of them being to get the education that you're able to get in Barbados, which is more of a British education. Her mother at the time really felt like that education system would give her a good foundation and wanted all 3 of her children to experience that. So at the age of 3, they all went on a boat together and they went to live with her aunt, uncle, and grandma on the island of Barbados. She attended the elementary school on the island, and when you see videos of her or read articles about her, her childhood was really exciting. And she really lights up when she talks about the time she spent on the farm where she grew up. Her grandma and her bonded a lot, teaching her respect, teaching her chores, and she loved learning within the system that was attributed to them on the island. She took care of goats and chickens and sheep. They grew sweet potatoes and tomatoes. The farm provided for them from like a food perspective, but it also gave them a small income to which they could, maybe go to a movie or do small things. So that was exciting. At the age of 9, she moved back to the US and she went into the American education system. Now, you have to remember when she back to the US, they were still in the Great Depression. So her parents were really both working really, really hard and really working around the clock. But they still made it sacred to have like family dinners and talk about how their day was, what they learned today. When Shirley originally went back into the American education system, she actually got held back a couple grades because her knowledge on U.S. history and U.S. geography was really non existent. She was frustrated by that, but at the same time, she really just started to pick up on it and became top of her class before she knew it. The most apparent manifestation of her West Indies roots, even as an adult, was she had a slight British accent that she retained throughout her life. But she attended public school in Brooklyn and graduated with high marks. She was accepted to Vassar and Oberlin College. Shirley attended Brooklyn College on scholarship and graduated cum laude with a BA in sociology. From 1946 to 1953, she worked as a nursery school teacher and then as a director of 2 daycare centers. She married Conrad Chisholm, a private investigator, in 1949. 3 years later, Shirley earned an MA in early childhood education from Columbia University and served as educational consultant to New York City's Division of Daycare from 1959 to 1964. In the research that I read, it talked a lot about her relationship with Conrad and what a huge support system he was. He's quoted as saying things like, behind every great woman is a wonderful man. And he really put her career and her desires in as a front runner within their relationship and supported her immensely. In interviews, you really see that passion that she has for politics because she lights up the same way. She talks about her childhood and she talks about her husband. She also talks about the influential woman, and really the woman who inspired her most was her grandmother, and secondary was Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, Layla, you are how old?
9.
Could you imagine if next year for school I brought you to England to go to school?
I would not like that because I don't know how to speak their language, and also I would lose all my friends at school.
But they speak English in London.
No, they don't.
What, out of all the women that we've learned about through this podcast, who would you say is the most inspiring to you?
The main character one.
You like Shirley from this one, or did you like any of the
one.
other ones that we talked about, like Buffalo Calf Road Woman, or?
I like the one with the girl on the bike.
Oh, one of the traveling ones. Yes.
And she got a bunch of people's names on their clothes.
Right.
And the first couple days she had to learn how to ride a bike because she was biking around the whole world.
And you've talked about wanting to be president. Do you still want to be president of these United States?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Because I also want to become a professional soccer player.
Yep, that's right.
Or a soccer coach.
So what Shirley did is she was one of the first women.
Or a soccer goalie.
That would be good. What Shirley did is she was one of the first women to run for president of the United States. Do you remember when Hillary Clinton ran for president?
Yeah.
So without Shirley, do you think Hillary still would have ran for president?
I don't know what that means.
For a lot of these podcasts that we do, we talk about firsts. So women who were the first people to do stuff.
Hillary Clinton should have got president,
All right.
not Donald Trump.
All right.
Because I don't like his hair.
I know you don't like his hair. That's one reason. In 1964, Shirley was elected to the New York State Legislature.
She was the second African American woman to serve in
Albany. A court-ordered redistricting that carved a new Brooklyn congressional district out of Shirley's neighborhood convinced her to run for Congress. The influential Democratic political machine headed by Stanley declared its intention to send an African American from the new district to the House. The endorsement of the machine usually resulted in a primary victory, which was huge to any election, and it would be even bigger in this really heavily Democratic area. In the primary, Shirley faced 3 African American challengers: civil court judge Thomas Jones, a former district leader and New York assemblyman, Dolly Robinson, a former district co-leader, and William C. Thompson, a well-financed state senator. Shirley roamed the new district in a sound truck and pulled up outside housing projects while she announced, quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Shirley. This is fighting Shirley Chisholm coming through." She really capitalized on her personal campaign style. Quote, "I have a way of talking that does something to people. I have a theory about campaigning. You just have to let them feel you," end quote. And we see some of this reminisce with Obama's campaign in campaigning for hope and change. In an article titled "Shirley Chisholm, Catalyst for Change," Stephen Marble writes, quote, "Imagine the scene. The first-term U.S. representative steps up to the House podium and promises to vote no on any new spending. Sound familiar? Well, it might, except that it was March 1969, and the speaker was the newly elected member from the 12th District of New York, the first African-American woman elected to Congress, Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm had come to Congress to focus attention on the nation's problem and her promise to vote no on additional spending. And she did just that. She would not vote to support any new money for the Defense Department in its ongoing war in Vietnam, end quote. Now, at this time, the war was at its peak. With over 500,000 U.S. troops deployed in Vietnam, and growing tensions between supporters and opponents of the war had sparked violent confrontations in the streets of American cities. The position taken by the new Congresswoman was not a popular one. In essence, she really stood alone. But she had stood alone before. After all, she wasn't interested in being popular. She was interested in solving problems like war, poverty, equality for women and racial minorities, poor housing. In another article entitled "Waging the Good Fight," the political career of Shirley Chisholm, Julie Gallagher writes, quote, "I will fight until I can't fight anymore. I don't mind the challenge," Shirley Chisholm boldly declares after her historic victory in 1968 over James Farmer, former head of the Congress of Racial Equality. Taking a momentous step, she advanced from the New York State Assembly to become the first African American elected to the United States Congress. Shirley hailed from the Bedford section of Brooklyn, one of the poorest urban districts in the nation. She was a vocal advocate for an activist government to really redress economic, social, and political injustice, and frequently used her national promise to bring attention to racial, sexual, and class-based inequality at a time when some people within the Black and feminist communities chose radical resistance to the system. Shirley chose to remain part of it. She had a firm belief in the promise of political structure, but she felt there was much to be changed before it could truly be fair and responsive, end quote. This article and this quote spoke to me just based on where we're at from a political spectrum, and also where I stated earlier that we need more Shirley Chisholms in our government. Right now, there is a huge resistance to our government in general. Our government's corrupt. It's not working. We're overspending. It's bloated. We're not being taken care of. People are lazy. I think Shirley chose, instead of to be resistant to the government and just kind of chalk it up as the government will never work, she chose to be a part of it. And she chose to fight for democracy and fight for the government within its own system. So I think that speaks to many of the women that you see that are running today, and many more of the women who are contemplating running and or should be running tomorrow. Shirley's political career, from her early years as a grassroots activist to her election of the House of Representatives and her still unprecedented success as a woman in a major party primary election for the U.S. presidency, it examines the ways she successfully navigated the rough political landscape, contending with racial and gender discrimination, which were deeply embedded in the political culture, and achieved victory where other African American had earlier tried and failed. Shirley clearly benefited from the changes that the civil rights and women's movement had yielded. However, Shirley's success as a political first was the result of really a far more timely campaign. She won because of a combination of factors, including her ideas about equality and justice, her political maturity, and her really strong personality. She was consistent in support and received a lot of support from African American in her district and the efforts of other grassroots activists that she really respected and admired. Shirley used her position in New York state politics to fight for the rights of all women, people of color, and the poor. In arguing for women's rights, Shirley forced the state assembly and Congress to contend with sexual discrimination in ways that they had not done. And she pushed members of a predominantly white middle-class feminist establishment to address their weakness in thinking about the needs of women of color. In fighting to end racial discrimination and for anti-poverty programs, Shirley joined with other African American political leaders and white progressives in the Democratic Party to demand that Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs make good on all their promises. At the same time, while Shirley was successful at gaining access to the inner chambers, political power, and was really able to fight for progressive legislation, sometimes it would be hindered by the exact political structures that she was trying to confront. The way it demonstrated, and really in some sort of legislation, Shirley worked on as a congresswoman. She championed a bill to ensure domestic workers received benefits. And it's really hard to believe that it was just, feels like it should have been like 100 years ago when workers were fighting for things like minimum wage and benefits and improved access to education and fight for the rights of immigrants. She sponsored a bill to expand child care for women, supported national school lunch bills, and helped establish the National Commission on Consumer Protection and Product Safety to ensure that the things that were bought and sold in the U.S. were safe for consumers. Shirley also worked tirelessly to expand the government-funded food stamps program so it was available in every state, and was instrumental in setting up an additional schema, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, otherwise known as WIC, which provided support for pregnant women and is still going on today. In politics, Shirley found her gender to be more of a particular setback. She's quoted as saying, "I met more discrimination as a woman than for being Black. Men are men." She had guts, and she made people believe that they too can be someone and were equal. And that's part of her political savvy or her message. Like I had mentioned earlier, when she's campaigning, she has to feel it, and she needs the people around her to feel it too. That desire that she had as a young child to really break boundaries was really what drove her to make a run for the president of the United States in 1972. She set out to seek the Democratic nomination a mere 3 years after she became a congresswoman. She's quoted as saying, quote, "I ran because most people thought the country was not ready for a black candidate, not ready for a woman candidate. Someday it was time in 1972 to make that someday come true," end quote. Shirley, whose slogan was "unbought and unbossed," said she never expected to win, but hoped for her candidacy would change the face and the future of American politics. The campaign wasn't super easy. Shirley survived several assassination attempts, and she even had to sue a network to ensure she was included in television debates. She made it far, as far as she could in this race, even all the way to the Democratic convention. She lost to the nomination of George McGovern, but left a lasting impression. She served 7 terms in Congress, retiring in 1982, after which she returned to teaching. Now, Layla, let's pretend that you're the president of the United States. Now, Shirley served 7 terms in Congress, which meant she had to be really good at like making deals and making compromises. Now, for you and your brothers, when you get together, how easy is it for us to pick a movie?
It's really hard
Why?
because we never agree on one.
That's right. Can you imagine what it would be like to be in Congress or be in the House of Representatives or anywhere to build a law? Do you think that would take a lot of compromise?
Yeah, because then you need like millions of people to agree with you, and our family only has 5 people in it.
Right. What are some things you think that help you make a decision? Is it like the way someone talks to you, the way they treat you? Is it
It's mainly the way that they talk to me.
Yeah. Why did you like Hillary Clinton more than Donald Trump? As you know, your little brother is a Trump supporter.
I like Hillary Clinton better, probably because she has better hair than Donald Trump.
It's important for you to vote based on how someone looks, how their appearance is. Got it.
And also, she would be the first girl president, and I kind of think she's a little better than him, because people are saying that Donald Trump almost started World War III.
Wow. Who's saying that?
I don't know.
Just people?
Yeah, people think that.
People think that.
People
What do you think of
that.
Shirley's story so far?
It's going pretty good.
Yeah.
See the movie on Boss. That was my little brother Everett talking.
To really get more of a feel of Shirley's persona, I would recommend seeing the historical documentary entitled Unbought and Unbossed. It's about her campaign to become the Democratic Party presidential nominee in 1972. Shirley was a Democrat from New York. She was the first Black woman elected to the United States Congress, and long before the likes of Reverend Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, the first African American of either gender to seek a major party's presidential nominee. Shirley, who died in January of 2005, undoubtedly knew that her chances of winning her party's 1972 nomination, let alone the general election, were nil. Even though she was a well-educated, articulate, and tough woman, she faced plenty of opposition, including from women and other Black politicians. She was even physically attacked on what she called the Chisholm Trail. In 1972, it was a time when really politicians were being shot. At that time, Alabama Governor George Wallace, another would-be Democratic nominee, was shot and paralyzed. She stayed the course all the way up to the Democratic convention in Miami, when she finally released her delegates to McGovern and continued serving in the House of Representatives until 1983. Shirley's autobiography and details of her presidential campaign can be found in her book, The Good Fight. We'll have all the links to the documentary in the book in the blog companion of this podcast. In the autobiography, she does not mince words at all about sexism from both white and Black men in the political arena. One of her most powerful quotes and predictions in the book was, quote, "The next time a woman runs, or a Black, or a Jew, or anyone from a group that the country is not ready to elect to its highest office, I believe that he or she will be taken seriously from the start. I ran because somebody had to do it first." End quote. While in Congress, she was a co-founder of the Congressional Black Caucus. And in 1984, she helped found the National Congress of Black Women, where she was the first national chair. In 1990, she co-founded African American Women for Reproductive Freedom, as well as many, many, many more. Shirley was a member of Delta Sigma Theta, one of the many members of their ranks with a career in politics. The Shirley Chisholm Project of Brooklyn's women's activism is a repository of women's grassroots social activism in Brooklyn since 1945 and ongoing into the present. In the spirit of Shirley's legacy as a path-breaking community and political activist, the archives will also follow the many paths she pioneered by including materials representing the wide range of women's grassroots activism throughout the borough. The archive consists of documents and other materials, including oral histories from people who knew or worked with Shirley, from the extraordinary diversity of women's activism organizations in Brooklyn since 1945. Housed in the Brooklyn College Library, it is a resource for students of all ages, community activists, public policy experts, scholars, and the general public. The archive will expand our understanding of women's place in history and of significance and consequence of social activism itself. At the end of her career in 1993, Shirley was nominated to be a U.S. ambassador to Jamaica by President Bill Clinton, though she had declined due to failing health. Congresswoman Lee successfully lobbied for a painting of Shirley to be hung in Congress and for a stamp to be released in her honor. In November of her last year, Shirley was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Shirley spoke about the audacity of hope decades before Barack Obama. In 1972, she became the first Black woman to run for the White House on a major party line. Now she was being honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom by the first African American commander-in-chief. President Obama quoted as saying, "There are people in our country's history who don't look left or right. They just look straight ahead. Shirley Chisholm was one of those people." He stated this when the audience had gathered at the White House to present her the award. Quote, "Shirley Chisholm's example transcends her life, and when asked how she'd like to be remembered, she had an answer. I'd like them to say Shirley Chisholm had guts, and I'm proud to say Shirley Chisholm had guts," end quote, by former President Barack Obama. So to wrap up this podcast, what are some things, Layla, that you remember about this podcast, or what's something that you'll take away from the story of Shirley Chisholm?
is that you should always believe in yourself.
That's a good one. Do you think that she, even back when she was in Barbados to when she had to leave Barbados and come to the U.S., so she was a farmer and then she moved to the city and she was 9?
Is that whenever she took a big change, and that was probably really hard for her.
Right. But also she stuck up for herself and stuck up for people around her and wanted to give everybody a better life or a better shot at a better life.
So not just to care about you, care about other people.
That's right. We want to thank everyone for joining today at Liberating the Queen. If you have thoughts or feedback on the podcast, please reach out to us at contact@liberatingthequeen.com. I want to thank my special co-host, Layla Moscow, for joining and being a part of it.
Thank you so much, you guys, for letting me be here today.
I want to thank Everett for making a small cameo appearance on the show while he's still watching Nerf Gun Wars on YouTube. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Everett.
We look forward to talking with everyone again on September 15th, 2018.